right, I have 7:29, one more minute. All right, so it's now 7:30 on November 18th, and I would like to call to order the November 18th meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Board. And I see that we're all present, and Gordon's now there. Okay, great. So our first meeting agenda item is just to review upcoming meeting dates. The next meeting is December 8th. And just note, obviously, we had to do this meeting for today. So hopefully, I apologize for that needing to reschedule the meeting, but it was unfortunate, but unavoidable. So let me start with, I know we also have minutes that are due to be approved. Gordon distributed those. Those are the minutes from September 8th. Gordon, I don't know if you got any more feedback from yours. I know you had feedback from one.
Yes, I have gotten feedback and I incorporated it and redistributed it. Most of the feedback was, editorial.
Assuming the board has received and reviewed that, were there any questions on those minutes? And if not, I will entertain a motion to accept them.
I'll move that we accept the minutes of, I'm sorry, which month was it? Sorry?
September 8th.
September 8th.
I seconded.
Got Gordon second. All right, so we'll do a roll call. Brian?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes. Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
And Pam?
Pam, you're muted.
Good morning, everybody.
That's a yes.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Pam, you approved, right? Those minutes?
Yes,
Okay. I just.
Sorry,
wasn't
yeah.
sure.
yeah. Yeah.
The approval is unanimous, so the September 8th minutes are accepted. But moving on to the agenda is the chair's updates.
Wait. Aren't there the stakeholders meeting? Was that reviewed already?
I don't believe that has been reviewed already.
I sent it around.
Did you get?
I've seen it.
Yeah, I got feedback from everybody.
Okay, so I don't have that date on the top of my head. Is everyone comfortable reviewing and approving the stakeholders meeting minutes?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the stakeholder minutes.
Second?
Second.
Okay, so roll call. Brian?
Yes.
Pam?
Yeah,
Alice?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
And Wendy, yes. So, all right, so we have unanimous approval for the stakeholders meeting as well. Great, thank you.
Now, I'm sorry, isn't there one more? I think it might have been
October.
July.
Oh.
Is that right?
You know what, we had some and we originally were deferring it, but then later in that same meeting, I thought we had approved those when someone
Okay.
came back.
By the way, Wendy, I didn't attend, it's coming back to me. I didn't attend the stakeholders meeting. I don't think I should vote probably.
So you're going to abstain?
You don't, you're allowed to.
Well, then I vote yes, in deference to everyone else.
Okay. Oh, have we taken the roll call on stakeholders yet?
Yeah.
And I think Pam is abstaining officially. Pam, or are you approving?
I just approve noting that I'm just doing it in deference to the rest. I did not attend the meeting. I don't think. I don't remember that.
Okay.
Whatever's easier for you, you know.
We'll call it unanimous approval. Okay, and then Gordon, the meeting in July, I thought we had approved. And so Karen,
Okay.
be honest here, but I thought we had approved them.
Well, I have in my drafts here that I last updated July 14th on October 29th. And so, yeah, but this one's clean.
Yeah,
All right, I guess.
it was emailed to me on October 22nd.
So I don't know that I have that. Or if I
Okay,
do-
all right. Well, we'll have another meeting soon so we can straighten this one out. Sorry, that I wasn't on top of it.
No, I apologize. I thought we had approved those, so. All right, so sorry for that disorganization. So we'll review that at our next meeting on December 8th. In terms of directors updates, I don't have formal updates. I'll just acknowledge that Alice, you were out last month, but we did have some background discussions on some of the meeting votes that we're going to have today in terms of, and there were materials sent in advance. So if there's questions that we need to address as part of that hearing, I'm sure you'll hear the background. So and the only other.
I have to say, I did watch the video and I followed up the conversation with Matt Cummings. So I think I'm up to date on.
Wait, hold it. Before we go on, you know, I sent around October too. And that, I mean, you know, if we get in the habit of doing these quickly, we'll have what you just said, Wendy, right, will be in everybody's minds because they just would have reviewed the last month's minutes. So I don't think that we should give October another month to stew. You know, kudos to Karen for getting it out quickly enough. I distributed the October 13th draft with feedback from Laura Scott on November 6th, or at least that's when I modified it last. It's draft 2. So
I've read through that and don't have any feedback on it. Looks good. Have other members had a chance to look at October?
I mean, I'd even say that, you know, in terms of complying with open meeting law and transparency, we should err on the side of transparency here. Just get it out.
So I agree. Let me just acknowledge. So Gordon, I know I reviewed minutes and I try to get them back to you right away. I have not reviewed or given you any feedback, and usually I do. So I will just acknowledge I have not reviewed them, unfortunately.
Okay.
I have a lot on my plate, and so if I miss it, I apologize to the board. So I'd like to defer that one, and I'm sorry for that.
I agree. I'm in the same boat. Very busy time for me. I don't want to, I would have to abstain.
Okay, so I'll do my better job to make sure I review them. I usually do, so I
All
apologize.
right. Well, here, let me just say, tooting my own horn here, it's like we're up to date, except for this part. But like I got them out. We're actually up to date.
Gordon,
So
I appreciate
anyway.
I know how much work that is, and you know, Karen does a phenomenal job, but it's still a lot of work, and you are carrying the load of the broadband group as well, doing minutes. So I appreciate all that you've done. It's a lot of work. I understand. So we need to do our part and support you. So apologize for that. So we'll wrap these up for December. Okay. All right. So let's move on in the agenda. Sort of, Dave. Let's move on to your update.
No chairs update, Wendy?
No, update.
Okay. So volunteers, EV specialists, and heating and cooling coaches tabled at Discovery West Concord Day on October 23rd. They talked with about 30 to 40 residents about EVs and heat pumps, so that was a good response. We had a storm response on October 27th. Areas impacted were Losbrook Road, Crabtree, Hillside, Strawberry Hill. This was the nor'easter that caused significant damage on the coastal areas. We really dodged a bullet on this storm. We had some significant damage, and due to the small workforce right now, we called a mutual aid. Reading sent a 2-man crew, and they assisted with the restoration effort. So all in all, it went well, but it could have been much worse. On November 7th, we had an automobile accident, struck a pole at 160 Main Street. The pole had a main circuit on it that transitions from the underground to the overhead. Pole was snapped, the underground feeder was destroyed. Approximately 45 minutes later, pole 161 snapped, which was, the next pole up. That also had an underground feeder on it. And when the pole snapped, it damaged the underground feeder as well. Both circuits were out of service. It was a result of about 25% of our customers without power. Engineers and line workers were able to isolate the area and restore power to the majority of the customers by backfeeding them with other distribution circuits. We called in mutual aid, Groton assisted, and we were able to get all the customers on that evening with the exception of 3 customers that needed to have electricians to put their services back on their house. And that happened the next morning. Permanent repairs took place over the next 4 days. We used aid from Groton as well. And so now all the circuits are back to normal operation. One point of note, we had one of the main transformers out for service from Eversource. So all the load was on transformer 2. And I only mention this because if that weren't the case, the solar saturation issue that I've mentioned in the past would have happened, and we would have lost the entire system while we would have backfeeding power. On November 11th, we had a squirrel get into the switchgear at New England Deaconess. This caused a circuit to operate. So Deaconess was out and Care One was out. We were able to transfer both the facilities onto the backup circuit. So, just an array of issues. On November 12th, we had another storm. This was a smaller response for our team. We only had 6 customers out on Sandy Pond and Cambridge Turnpike. But it was a big event for Public Works as, trees, limbs came down and catch basins were, clogged up from the leaves and whatnot. On the personnel side, we have a line worker grade 1 is accepted and is going through the pre-employment screenings. We have 2 additional applicants that are reviewing right now, just came in this week. We had a 2nd-class line worker start on Monday. So that's really encouraging. We have a network engineer that started on November 8th. We have a broadband technician starting on November 22nd. And the sustainability director started a couple weeks ago, and she was going to be here for a meet and greet. But since we rescheduled the meeting, that'll have to take place in December because she's at the middle school meeting right now. And that's my update.
Can I ask a question?
I just have one question. So on your, just to follow up, the risk that we still have with the solar saturation, Dave, so can we put that on the agenda for maybe for December, just to review that topic? Because if I recall, our battery storage is part of that solution, I believe. And it's a general risk for the whole light plant that everyone needs to refresh their memory about, because it's important. It's maybe it's low risk, but it's catastrophic.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about it in December. The good thing is the accident happened. We were assessing it, and one of the early things we did was check the load. The engineers checked the load, because if we needed to tie, we would have. And I had forgotten that one of the transformers was out of service when I asked the team to take a look. So, there were 2 options. It was, take a transformer out, which was already done, and the second one was to shut off that circuit. for a period of time while we're doing the restoration piece. So,
Dave, are you not able to curtail the solar production from the WR Grace or the landfill?
yeah, we have no control over that. With the way we curtail it is by shutting the circuit off so it doesn't go into.
All right. Shutting the circuit was essentially the same thing then.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alice, did I cut you off earlier? Were you trying to say something?
Nope, it was just on this and it's perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Dave. I'm glad to hear you've got hires. I heard 4 that we're just starting and we still have 2 open, just to recap. Okay,
Right.
good. Great, excellent. Well, congratulations. Nice to have people on staff and good luck with those next 2. All right. Moving on in the agenda, we're going to move on to the broadband update, and I believe the board got a written update. I trust everyone's seen that, but then we'll move on with that update. And Greg, you ready to, are you presenting?
Sure. Good morning. So as of last week, the broadband customer list is 1,535 active customers, 1,402 residential, 133 business customers. Backlog update, we have completed, looking at it's a moving target, but we've completed 50 of the backlog of the 150 that we have confirmed and identified. We're getting approximately 27 plus or minus requests monthly, and we're installing roughly 23 to 25, plus or minus customers monthly. So that's where we're at right now. Dave gave the personnel update as well, which the big news is we're going to have a 4th technician on this coming Monday. And we have already brought on the network engineer who is already been involved in both the town and the broadband network upgrades and improvements. Just quickly, the terms and conditions are done, going out to town council for review. I'll come back to number 2 in a second because I know that's a longer conversation. GIS migration is completed to a test server. We are using it, but it isn't fully in production yet, but the broadband team is using it. Service work orders are now being received by iPads remotely, and we've eliminated a lot of paper. So that is also working fully right now and working well. And the fiber inventory is ongoing and will probably be for quite some time as we get to it. The core upgrade, and one of the reasons why we're a big agenda item here is we're looking to put about $120,000 into the new core upgrade. Highlights the new core upgrade will be right now and again, this is all technology and time. The system has about a 20 gig throughput. The upgrade will allow it to have about a 450 gig throughput. We are going to go to a dual router, dual switch configuration, very similar to what we have today. It's just going to add redundancy within the network, since we're really looking to make this a world-class and uptime of well into the high 90 percentile. We're going to co-locate all the gear supporting the network, including 2 physical DHCP server physical appliances, so that we will have 0 dependency on the town's network connections to any functionality of the broadband. Again, uptime will be just increased to that very high level of 99%. And we are, I believe it's happening this weekend. We're increasing, it's got pushed off a couple times at Verizon. We're increased one of our ISPs to 10 gig. We're going to increase a second ISP to 10 gig. And we have in that new design, small devices that are going to allow our single ISP connections to be truly automatically redundant to the 2 switches, redundant switches, so that they will identify if one switch goes down, the ISP will automatically switch over to that second redundant switch. And of course, that second redundant switch will know the first has gone down and will come into play. It will create a truly as redundant as we can get, I would say at this point, in a world, a really true up to standard world-class network if we go forward with this. Total cost on 120K, as I said. That's what we're looking for.
So Greg, you sort of quickly talked about the upgrade. That covers all those 1 through 5 items in the priority list in your written update?
Correct.
And so the $120,000 investment, is that a discussion item that you're looking for feedback from the board on? Are we looking to use that from our reserves? And I don't know, you, Dave, or do we need to weigh in on this? Are you looking for a vote of support? It
I
sounds
think
like
we're looking for just transparency. I think we wanted the board to be aware of it. And as far as budgeting and things, I'm going to leave that to Dave.
So I think it's, the important piece here is, we talked about being transparent, as Greg mentioned, but, you'll see some of these items probably in the upcoming budget. And so getting the information out there now, so it's not a surprise. And it's been, Greg and his team has been working on this for quite some time, and we have been, very forthcoming with you guys saying that the numbers were coming. And so we would have had him at the last meeting, but, Greg wasn't able to be there, and I wanted to make sure that he was here when the numbers were presented. But it's more of a transparency thing, and to allow you guys to ask questions. We don't expect you guys to get into the technical piece of it. That's not where the board's supposed to be. The board's supposed to be at a high level. But what Greg has laid out is a very, very good redundant system that is what we need. And it fills some gaps that we've had for a little while now. So, Greg and his team, they've done a good job putting this stuff together.
Dave, where I was going was, I know we've been working on it, and it was sort of reviewed and presented as done. So like the redundant switch gives us excellent failover, so it's automated. I guess I'm trying to figure out what's actually done and what's new that might come.
Sorry for the confusion there. So there's two core pieces, or two primary pieces to it. There's the Calyx side, which is actually the switches that actually feeds to the residents. And then the core, which we're looking for the upgrade, and that is the real machine and the brains, the heart of the performance of the Calyx network. So as far as what we've done were a couple things. There were a couple primary switches on the Calyx side. So again, breaking up in 2 different pieces on the Calyx side. And we realized that there's one switch that if it went down, it would cause a network wide. So we cloned that switch. We have it now sitting above the active switch. And if that active switch stopped working, the downtime would be now down to like 15 to 30 minutes, opposed to us having to find a switch, configure it, get it in place, switch over the connection. So it was just really a physical, we had the additional switch there, so it made a lot of sense. That was one that we truly wanted to clone. So that's what we were talking about, that redundancy, or that decision. As far as the core network's concerned, the core network's been the original core network that was designed. Good design, where it's worked beautifully, still working beautifully right now. What I think just going back to the outage, it really just showed there's some things that we could do to prevent that in the future. And we know by co-locating the equipment, it will just take any dependencies off the town network that were for the broadband network. So they will be truly independent when we're done with this. As far as the upgrading, it's just the equipment's been there for 7 years, some of it for a little less, but it is, as technology increases so quickly, And as we see this, becoming such a priority and such a priority to the town, and what we've realized with the outage, that the performance, the equipment's aging. There were pieces that we did need to change that were end of life. And so with that, it makes sense to just take that next step. And with a lot of things that are being looked at in the future and trying to increase the, overall, customer base and everything, it just really makes a lot of sense to bring the network now to today's standards instead of 7 years ago when it was first designed.
Thanks, Greg. And I think you've done a lot of work and, leverage consultants to put a good design together, which is great. So in terms of budget approval, in your status report, there were a number of issues identified. Really, the funding relates to this redesign of the core network. And the notes are it needs board approval. So the assumption here is that when we look at the 2022 budget, that's when that vote of approval will happen. I'm assuming that's the case.
That's correct.
All right. So for all intents and purposes, the other items are sort of in process and funded already. Just want to be clear. That's all.
Yes. And those are things we knew we could do today with what we have. Correct.
Yep. Just being clear. So, okay. Does the board have questions on the status and the core network redesign at all? I know we've talked about it a few times. Alice?
Just a couple of really quick questions. The first one, it's great to hear that there's redundancy and an automatic switch over to the backup should we need it. I'm curious, do we have a notification process that if it's in the middle of the night and something happens, that somebody in the IT tech world gets an alert and says, well, we're back on backup because now it's the only one that we have that would run it. So does that happen automatically as part of the switchover?
Yes, that does. And we did purchase already. It's a very inexpensive software that does that, but that software has already existed on the town network and the broadband network previously. We now have, again, we have our own package, and we're just so we get just the broadband alerts opposed to the town network alerts. But yes, but that's been in place already.
Okay, perfect. The other question is about, I think maybe it was our last meeting or the one before, we talked about the problem with supply chains, and that there's a very long backlog on wires and whatever else we need to maintain the system with fiber. And I'm wondering whether we have enough on hand. I know you're doing an inventory, but are we in pretty good shape that we're not dependent on a year's timeline for meeting our need because of supply chain problems?
We definitely have we brought that up in a number of meetings. We're in the process of sourcing some 2-strand, which is what is backlogged. And we do have quite a bit in inventory, but it will become an issue. We're aware of that. And we're in the process of looking for other distributors right now. That is one of my priorities right now.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. I think Brian had some.
Context in terms of the plan. Can I just add, it's a follow-up question here. Do we know, have a projection of how long your inventory will last, given your current install rates, et cetera?
I don't, to be honest. We can bring that to the next board meeting. I have not done an actual, until I understand exactly what's in inventory and our installation rates and all that, but I can come up. And again, it's a guesstimate, considering because some pulls to a building may be 100 feet, some may be 500 feet, or longer.
So inventory is next week, and that's a big week for us. And we'll have a good feeling for what we have on hand. And then we can cross that up onto what we have for requests, and then we'll be able to answer the question. But my forecast is we don't have enough to do all the backlog with the requests we're getting right now. So that's why we're looking and going to vendors. Anyone that has anything on hand, we're trying to, purchase, opposed to just getting quotes from our normal vendors. And that's what's going to get us, by that 52-week lead time that we mentioned last month. So it's an issue. We're working it. But after next week, we'll have a better feel for how far we can go with what we have.
Thanks, Deb. That makes sense. Brian, I know. Yeah.
So you mentioned in the call today that the cost is around 125. Your notes that were sent around says 115.
Yeah, I think I said 120, I believe, instead of 125, and I'm kind of just
Okay.
adding adding a little bit to the unknown. But the 115 is the actual cost of the quotes we have received for all the pieces that would have upgraded them. That's correct.
Great. And my other question was about how that was going to be paid for, and it sounds like it's a budgeting process from Wendy's question. Well, it's great to hear that we're really getting transparency into the work being done to make the broadband network more resilient. And I'm glad that there's also the committee looking at expanding it because it is a necessity. All right, I'll save some time. Thanks.
I don't see other hands raised. So I guess we're ready to move forward into our discussion on rates. And so at this time, we're going to suspend the meeting and go into a rate hearing. So it requires a roll call vote to do that. So let me just start with, we need a motion to move into the rate hearing. Can I get a recommendation to do that?
I move that we suspend the regular meeting in order to move into a rate hearing.
Thank you, Gordon.
I second.
Sam, thank you. All right, so roll call vote. Wendy approves. Brian?
Approve?
Alice?
Agreed.
Okay, Gordon?
Yes.
And Pam?
Yes.
Okay, so we will officially then move into our rate hearing on the topic. And so some materials were distributed to the board, but in terms of presenting, who's going to take the lead on that? Is that you or maybe Laura?
Yeah, Laura and I are going to do it together.
Okay, all right.
Well, actually, Matt is going to kick us off with our first slide, which kind of gives us a current view of what our 2022 income statement might look like if we do nothing. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, good morning. Before we got into the rate discussion, I wanted to kind of share with you where we were sitting with our forecasted numbers. What you see on the screen is the income statement. The first column is 2020, what was done in the books and audited. We lost about a little over $2 million that year, which I'm sure you're all aware of. In 2021, we're currently projecting about a $600,000 profit net income. A couple things I wanted to point out. The fourth item from the top is provision for rate refund. This is kind of us taking a balance sheet item and I guess buoying the year so that we are more profitable than we otherwise would have been. And I think that this was discussed as part of the cost of service study. That was our plan to use that 1.7 million in 2021. The 600,000 represents a little bit under a 1% rate of return for 2021. The big driver of us not hitting our 2 to 3% is the cost of power in 2021. So I think Laura's been speaking to that lately in the meetings, that the cost of power is going up considerably. Moving to 2022, if you go to the bottom, you'll notice that there's a large deficit. If we are trying to if our target is a 2.5% rate of return, 1.7 million, we are going to miss our target by 4.7 million. This scenario is as if we did not have any intervention as far as rate changes or PCA or using the rate refund. So also in this scenario, the net of these, the 1.7 and the 4.7 is what our net income would be. So about $3 million is a $3 million deficit is what we're looking at. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Matt. Can you advance the slide?
Yep.
Could I ask a quick question before we? Sorry. So up on sales, the electricity sales, you have a decrease in the forecast for 2022 versus 2021. What's the reason for the million shortage? Is there a prediction that we're going to sell less in 2022?
We are currently having a somewhat favorable year in 2021 for sales. If you recall, we had a very poor July, but we had very big June, I think it was in August. So we are merely predicting a return to normal weather. We don't predict having surges or heat waves or cold snaps. So they could happen, right? So one thing that could make the deficit better is sales would be higher, but we don't know that.
Perfect. Thank you.
And this
Okay.
also assumes no rate change. Right?
Yes, this is the do nothing scenario. So next slide, I just want to talk a little bit more. This is in support of the numbers Matt just shared with us. This is a snapshot of how much we believe power is going to cost us in 2022, which is the pink column, almost $23 million. And the green bar is the amount currently in rates to collect for purchase power. So rates will only collect 18.4 million, and we think we're going to need 22.7 million, which is a deficit of $4.3 million. So almost that entire deficit you saw on the income statement is attributable to power. Okay, next slide. Here we're showing you some different possible proposed funding sources to cover this power supply gap, not the net income statement gap, but merely the cost of power. One is an additional rate refund. We have, even though we used 1.7 million in 2021, we have about 1.5, almost 1.6 million available that we could use. This is money that was collected previously in rates on customer bills that was earmarked for power, but power didn't cost us that much in those years. So we saved money to be returned to customers. It has to be returned to customers by law because power supply has to be revenue neutral. And so instead of bill credit or, sorry, I hope you can't.
Wait, hold it.
Yep,
I can't hear you because of the dog.
sorry. This 1.5 million is money that is due and owing to customers related to power supply, rather than return it as a bill credit or a check or something of that sort. We can use it to lower customer bills, okay, for power supply costs that otherwise would have been higher rates. So it's essentially returning the money to the customers. It's just that it's being done by not increasing the rate as much. So we have 1.5 million there. In the 2020 cost of service study, it was anticipated that we would have a rate increase between 2021 and 2022 of about 4%, which would raise about 1.3 million. And finally, if we want to cover this full gap, we could also put a power cost adjustment, which is a temporary increase to power bills. If we did, we could do it over a short period of time, say just the winter. And to raise this amount of money, the PCA would have to be about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which would be about a 14% increase to customer bills. Or we could do it more gradually over the entire year, and the PCA would be less than a penny, which would be at a 5% increase. So if you go to the next slide, Matt. This is simply a slide showing that in 2020, the cost of service study that was performed called for, there's roughly a 3.4% rate increase in 2022. Okay, next slide. Here's the slide that shows you a few different options. Column 1 is the do nothing scenario that we showed you on slide 1 that results in the $4.7 million loss. If we instituted all options, okay, all hands on deck here. We did the rate increase, we did a PCA, and we took the money from the provision for rate refund, we would miss our 2.5% return by about 400,000, which means the light plant would make about $1.3 million. Okay, it's the difference between these two numbers. If you wanted to abandon the idea of trying to earn a return at all in 2022 because of the power cost pressures, we could eliminate one of these potential funding sources, let's say the PCA, okay? We would earn no return and we'd still lose about $133,000, which, given the uncertainty in all these numbers, you might as well call that even, because we can't predict within any more certainty than that. So I guess what we're showing you is a scenario where we have 3 funding sources and the light plant would make 1.3 million, or we only do 2 of the 3, and you could choose which ones, but we would recommend that we go ahead with the rate increase and we use the provision for rate refund. And if we do provide rate relief for the customers, then it would be in the form of eliminating the PCA, which case we would project to have another year of roughly net even income. So those are the figures, the financials. It's up to you guys to kind of decide the policy behind what should we target for net income for the light plant and how much should we be willing to raise rates to do so. The 1.3 is about a 5%, well, 4% increase. The PCA is another 5%. So you're looking at either a 10% with both funding mechanisms or a 5% with just one. That's increased to rates. Okay, I'm done.
And Laura, the driving force for this increase in power expense is the natural gas, or is it the long-term trend of just prices for these things increasing?
It's mostly the former, where we have a commodity crisis right now for natural gas and for oil. Oil is at very high values right now worldwide. And so it's bringing up, Brian, the prices for this winter the most, but it's also raising the entire complex. So right now, projected power costs for 23 and 24 and 25 are also higher, not as high as 22, because it's projected that the crisis will attenuate, but it is raising prices overall. But it's not due to capacity or transmission, it's due to the commodity price of energy.
So it's the world market for natural gas that has winter bubbles, or is it a seasonal bubble that's predicted, or like, because you mentioned 22 and 23, is it that natural gas is expected to continue to be more expensive than previously on a monthly basis throughout the year, or is it the winter demands for natural gas are becoming so extreme that we're going to see these winter spikes again and again?
It's
trying to understand.
It's both. The whole complex, so summer, winter, every month has gone up. The whole fixed price structure has gone up along with oil, okay, natural gas and oil. But the winter spike is even bigger than usual. So you've got both the complex moving up and you've got the spike moving up. Double whammy, I believe is what it's known as.
I've got some thoughts, but I'll let you. It looks like Dave wants to chime in and give his thoughts.
No, I was just chuckling about the double whammy. I haven't heard that in a while.
The 1980s game show. I love that show. So my thoughts are basically if it's an increase in the expense for electricity during the winter, a PCA during the winter makes a lot of sense to me. But if it is going to be an increase going forward, where that the cost of energy is just higher now going forward, then putting it into rates makes a lot more sense. So that's why I kind of had that question, because I don't want I don't want to annualize an expense that happens in the winter, because the reason that I come to these meetings is I want to align the expenses that are created with the billing that we do for customers, so that everybody is pushing in the same direction. And I'm concerned about trying to avoid rate shock by annualizing a cost over the year, because then people don't feel the pain when the expense comes in and we still have to have it paid. So given the scenarios you showed on your slide, I think the full increase is what we need to do for the winter with the PCA in order to collect when the expenses are incurred.
Brian, just in reply to your comment, please remember that when Baker Tilly anticipated the 4% rate increase required to meet the revenue requirement, that was in 2020 before the prices spiked.
Right.
So that 4% is not driven by commodity costs. That was driven by increased costs at the light plant.
Well, the slide that you showed that gave our options, there was the option that did not have a PCA and an option that did have a PCA. And then there was a do nothing, bad management option because of, not collecting enough to cover off on expenses. So option 2, thank you for putting up the slide. Option 2 is what I'm saying I feel makes the most sense, where PCA is in there for the winter months, but then defaults to option 3 in the spring.
Now, Brian, if you go back to the slide, I think it's before this one, Matt. If we were to do that, try one more. If we were to collect that 1.4 million over just the winter months, that's going to be a 2.5 cent PCA plus the 4%, okay, that came from the rate increase. So what you would be doing is increasing winter bills for customers by almost 20%. So just so you're aware, I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just want to make you aware of the magnitude. If you try to squish this revenue collection into these months, it would mean a substantial increase for customers in the winter.
But that is reflective of how our expenses are increasing.
That's true. That's true.
So I think a good explanation to customers for that PCA of 2.5 cents would need to go out to explain that this is not our management of the light plant. This is the energy markets and the effect of natural gas supplies. That's my thoughts. I'm gonna stop talking and let other board members give their thoughts.
So while this screen's up real quick, I just want to point out the rate refund that's shown here. That's not something that we need to vote on. We've put this out here that we're going to use that rate refund because it is revenue neutral funds, and that's the option there. So that's not the big piece. The big piece that the board needs to discuss is the annualizing it or doing it over the winter months. And history on stuff like this, we've done it over the whole year. Brian bringing up some very valid points. But the reason why we typically do it over the whole year is to minimize the rate shock. So that's really what you guys need to be discussing.
Thank you. Pam?
I just, is there any chance that we will overshoot and have excess at the end?
That's always possible, Pam. And if we do, that money goes into the rate refund and it would be used to offset at a later time. So,
Okay, so it goes back, it gets used later. And I gather from the presentation, which by the way is excellent, thank you, that we don't expect that we will have overshot. Our estimates are pretty consistent with what the data shows. Is that right?
yeah.
So Pam, we forecast based on a 50-50 probability, not like a 90-10. So in other words, we're 50% probable that the income will be higher than what we stated and 50% probable that it'll be less than what we stated. So we try to, this number, this point forecast we're giving you, which will never hit, okay, is our best guess at this time. But the likelihood of it being something different than that is almost 100%.
And in any event, anything should we miscalculate goes back to the rate refund.
Mhm.
Okay. It doesn't become discretionary funds for the use of the light plant, excuse me.
No,
Is that right?
No,
Yeah.
all power supply is supposed to be revenue neutral. That's what we have the rate refund for. And so if we over collect, it goes in there. And if we under collect, we take from there.
Okay,
So that's what we're doing now is we're planning to take from the rate refund to help offset the
right,
increase.
right. Thank you. Thanks.
Do you have an opinion or preference in terms of how to spread the risk to do it over January through December or throughout the year?
My preference is to spread it out over the year so that we don't have, a 20% increase for 3 months, but that's where I've been. That's the way we've done it in the past. It's really up to you guys to decide. Brian's kind of expressed a different approach, which is to do it over the winter months. And he has some good points there as well. So it comes down to what you guys think, but my preference would be to spread it over the whole year to kind of minimize the rate shock.
So Dave, I guess I was reflecting on other board members' preferences. I would agree that I'm concerned about the rate shock that we would get if we just did it through December through March, but however, that's consistent with our cost of service philosophy of charging the costs as we incur them. But I think it's a big hit for some people, particularly during the winter. So my preference would be to spread it over the course of the year, but explain that to customers because they're gonna still ask about that sort of charge. And would this appear as sort of any kind of different charge on the bill, or it would just look like an increase in the rate? How would that look to customers?
There'd be a line item for a PCA of whatever is determined, and it would go per kilowatt hours times by the number that's shown in front of you guys. Either the 2.5 or almost a penny.
So either way, whether it's January through April, we will be able to customers can reference it and see it explicitly. That's important. Okay. So let me just go back and ask Pam and Gordon explicitly. Do you guys have a preference or an opinion on which you'd prefer?
I have a question. I mean, basically,
Could
there will be a narrative explanation in plain English or not in the bill?
We're going to have to do some notification to customers that a PCA is coming. It'll be on the bill. I don't know if it'll be explained in detail on the bill, but we do need obviously to get word out on what a power cost adjustment is and why that's important.
Yeah, I mean, that goes, I think obviously that would be a plain English explanation is good. The other thing I would just observe is this isn't a multi-year rate increase. This is a bounded increase that would either spike very quickly or just be attenuated over a relatively short period of time. Is that right? I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it. So the sort of the disingenuousness of the over time piece to flatten the shock isn't that great. I mean, it's a short-term fix that's short-term no matter what. Is that a fair statement?
That's not necessarily the case. And that's why I've been raising my hand. I wanted to clarify that we're actually talking about two different things here. Laura, on the slide that we're looking at right now, funding the forecasted deficit, I see two lines, rate increase and PCA. I think that everything that we've been talking, all of the conversation that I'm hearing has been directed to the PCA. Questions about how long it will be. Will it be winter only or year round or the whole year? But the rate increase is different. That's going to get latched in and be permanent. And I think we need to keep those two things separate. They have very different implications. I think that let's just clarify that for, better or worse, mostly what committee members have been talking about, board members have been talking about up till now has been the PCA. And I would say that I asked the same question that Dave that Wendy just asked a second ago, which is, hey, wouldn't it be better to spread it out over the year rather than have it a focused short-term shock? And I mean, that was kind of my attitude at when when this came up at the last meeting. But then I think it was Laura pointed out that there's kind of a moral hazard, so to speak. That's not the word that Laura used the last time, but that like you want to try and direct, you want to give a real economic signal to people about the cost of the energy they're using at the time they use it. And if we make the PCA apply for a longer period of time, you could have people consume a lot of electricity in the winter, but not really pay the true price of that. Having said that, I still kind of, I personally kind of lean towards just smoothing it out a bit, just to kind of, and more or less ignore the moral hazard.
I'll just acknowledge that we are still in the rate hearing and there'll be more time for discussion. Alice, I do see your hand raised.
So I just wanted to offer the same, my thoughts on the rate. I understand Brian's point of that we should be charging people the rate that it costs us at the time of that we need the power. But I think that we can achieve that goal without actually inflicting pain on the ratepayer. That we can, by spreading out the cost of the PCA over the course of a year, if we do a good education program, people understand that that's what we're doing because we're making it easy. I know you're shaking your head. No, Brian, I disagree with you on this one. And I'm just giving the board my opinions about why I wouldn't do that.
Apologies, Alice. I didn't
That's
mean-
fine. I saw your head shaking. So, here's where I disagree, that I think that we can, through a good education and outreach program, let people understand that it's to their benefit that we have the ability to manage the monthly rates that they pay, knowing that we have to raise an additional 1.4 million or something, whatever that number is, to cover the cost of an increased worldwide shortage of gas. And that rather than make them pay up front, we're doing it over the course of a year. And I think we get that same message without inflicting the pain in the winter months. So that's where I'm thinking on this, that I'd rather see it spread out rather than make people feel the pain for a common good, for a commodity that they have no control over. And when we think about going forward, it's really hard to predict world markets a year in advance. Maybe Laura's better at that than I certainly am, but it's really hard to predict where we're going to be in another 8 months, or as next winter comes into play, that we may need again a PCA, we may not. And this approach allows us to levelize that across a longer period of time so we could raise the revenues we need for this year and perhaps even bank a little going into the next. Those are my thoughts.
Brian?
I just wanted to mention that this is the kind of discussion I'd like to hear from the board. This rate philosophy, as Dave put it the other day, this has to happen more in our discussions about rates, in our philosophy as a board and how we're going to administer rates. This is why I have been after getting a discussion about time of use. So I appreciate the discussion. It sounds like Gordon and Alice are on the other philosophy than I am, where they want to avoid rate shock. I would really like to see alignment between expenses and collection so that there is signals, because I think we talk about education campaigns on these topics, but no one reads them. The majority of residents just pay their bills or wonder why their bill went up, but they don't get into the detail. They don't research. So if they see a 2.5 cent increase on something called the PCA, they're going to read about it. They're going to actually make the effort to educate themselves on it. So those are my thoughts. But thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And it is our job to represent the interest of the ratepayers. So in that vein, I'm having a difficulty seeing if anybody else from the audience.
I just wanted to, I'm very sympathetic to what Brian is saying. I think that that's aspirationally absolutely what we should do. I'm not sure I'm as cynical perhaps on the question of education. If we educate properly and learn how to do it, then, I know you're shaking your head again, but that becomes a major aspiration, I would say. So, and I think I extract from what Alice said, something in the nature of this is almost like a pilot, or this is like a moment when we can, smooth the peak, and know that it's, in my judgment, relatively short term, can be revisited, and enables us to honor the uncertainty of the projections. So I guess I agree with everybody. I think that we need to be more focused on education that is meaningful. We need to aim at what Brian is talking about and look at this as a short-term opportunity to examine the question. And on that basis, I think I would go in the direction that Alice and Wendy have suggested.
Thank you. I see a couple hands raised from the audience. So let me move to those individuals. Mark Howell has his hand raised first.
Hold on a second.
Oh, sorry.
We're in the rate hearing. The comments from the public should come when we're out of the rate hearing.
Okay. So then we can wait. Gordon, do you have additional comments?
So maybe I didn't ask that clearly, but there were 2 lines on that view graph. One of them was a rate increase, the other was BCA. Do people agree that we're only talking about the BCA? Because the rate hearing, the rate increase, I know it was in the Baker Tilly. I know that we were warned about it, but I'm not ready to move forward on that. I think particularly in the context of addressing this particular crisis. Anyway, we don't have rate sheets, and what's the process on that? I also, it's like a little concern about, when you add it all up, and by the way, the rate increase, if that's what we're talking about, and it was actually optional, right? It was just one of the options we were given. It's permanent. It's also salary oriented, so it doesn't go into the PCA necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily be refundable in the same way that a PCA would. So just what's the intent here?
So Gordon, to your point, there's 2 pieces there, right? That we have in front of you. It's the rate increase that Baker Tilly has proposed, and we're proposing that we do that because there'll be a deficit without that. We're also saying there's also an increase, and that's what we're looking at with the PCA. And the 2 options with that are annualized or over the winter months. So we're looking for the board to vote on one of the 2 options. Option 1 really isn't an option. We can't do anything. That was really to show that there's a huge deficit and why. Option 2 and 3 are what we're looking at, but the Baker Tilly increase is needed. The PCA, and whether the PCA is annualized or over the month, that's what you guys can determine.
So I just as a manager, as a director, as a board member, I hate to say this, but this is salary driven, right?
Not necessarily. So Gordon, a couple things. Can I respond to a comment you made earlier before you go on to the next topic? So rate changes are never permanent. You guys can always decide at a future time to change the rate. And in fact, the Baker Tilly cost of service study that was done in 2020 anticipated increases for 21 and 22, and then it was relatively flat. I think it was actually a slight decrease for 23 and then modest 1% to 2% increases for 24 and 25. Now, obviously, things will change, and by the time we get there, those numbers will probably be different. But in terms of what was needed, it's not just salaries, it's anything that's not power supply related. So maintaining the distribution system, it includes equipment, it includes materials. It's basically the cost of running the light plant, which is not just the salaries. It's a little more comprehensive than that. And so, those 2 points that you can always change the rate. It's not permanent. It's what was anticipated for 2022, but it's not like if you vote this in, you can never decrease rates again. You can always vote to decrease rates if costs go down.
Well, okay, and the point being that, maybe we need to look at costs too. That's all. I hate to say it, but, maybe, and that generally means taking away some services. I'm not in the position to say what would be something that we could subtract in terms of what we deliver, or maybe people are happy with this and we should, the basic plan, Baker Tilly, is to ramp up these costs in order to continue providing the great service we have. So.
Oh, and in terms of providing the rate tariff sheets, Gordon, so each rate, every element of the rate, every line item is in that cost of service study report, which you have a copy of. So you can go in and look by each rate class exactly what it would be, just like it would be in a tariff sheet. I did put together an Excel spreadsheet also that compares their proposed 22 against 21 for each rate class, like in a shortened, condensed version, which we can make available.
Laura, a quick question on your slide. You said PCA rate increase and rate refund, and the rate increase of 1.3 million. That is in the energy charge or in the distribution charge? Gordon's comments about salary is confusing me a bit on this.
So it was determined according to its cost of service, Brian. So for example, in the proposed 2022 rates, capacity actually goes down. Because if you remember, market prices for capacity are falling. So the capacity element of the rate goes down, but distribution goes up because that's got some salary and materials in it.
So
and power supply is doing its own thing.
Yeah, so the words rate increase is holistic. It's all of the components. And what's driving that portion is mostly the distribution collection.
I'd have to look to see in each case, what it is.
Well, it's important because we're trying to keep power supply separate from distribution in these discussions, and that seems to be a number that encapsulates both.
Well, no, remember, power supply is always going to be revenue neutral. So whatever we collect in 2022, if it ends up being over or under, is going to be returned to or collected further from ratepayers, no matter what we forecast.
So the 1.3 is power supply and distribution. So if we overcollect, I can't separate the two. So if we overcollect in power supply, it does go back to ratepayers. If we overcollect in distribution, it can be used for any purpose.
Correct.
And that 1.3 is that collection.
The 1.3, as you said, is holistic. It includes all sources of revenue, every element of the bill. So meter charges go up, capacity charges go down. It looks like energy was going up about 11% in 2023, Brian. And that's primarily driven by the additional half-cent, which we still haven't talked about.
Yes.
In the rec charge.
Well, that was my next comment I wanted to make in this discussion is I don't want to inflict the PCA and an increase in the rate for rec collection for offsetting. And if we do the annualized, that's a whole year where we don't continue to reduce emissions using our rec policy.
Oh, but we will be reducing emissions by a lot. We're going to go from somewhere, 50% last year to close to 100% by 2023 with current rec collections.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions in that. And we had a policy of we're going to increase every year half a cent to avoid rate shock. By deciding to do an annualized PCA, we're going to delay that for a year.
You know what, Brian, in our meeting last month, we agreed that we would defer that discussion until April at minimum, and that was premised on this PCA potentially being a first quarter. So I don't want to get overly complicated in this discussion, but recognize that's another decision that we have to make. But we've already sort of agreed in concept, if we do the PCA, we would delay that decision.
So yeah, that's why I want to bring that up in this meeting right now, is because if we make a decision to annualize today, when we get to April, it's going to be, well, we don't want to hit them with two. We'll by default already made that decision.
I'm not assuming that we would have made that decision. I think we need to reevaluate that.
Yeah, I'm certainly not. I'm not.
Yeah. I'm okay with a shorter term PCA.
At a higher rate?
Yeah.
And I would agree with Gordon.
All right, so Has the board commented enough so that we think we could move out of the rate hearing discussion? I would entertain
I
a
guess
motion.
I just doubling down on that last thing I said about costs. Another question I'd have would be, are there any expensive projects we could push back 6 months or 12 months? And basically, I'm just, here's the thing, is like we've drifted up to the top of the muni list, and now we've got a 14% a cost increase. And you know what? That's life, right? You have these setbacks, and I think that Concord will support us if they know that we've been diligent and that we're providing value. But on the other hand, if there's something we can do to kind of like step back a little bit, lessen it a little bit, I think they'd appreciate that too. I'm trying to speak for ratepayers here.
So to that point, Gordon, we looked at all the expenses. We're not coming to you guys not prepared. We looked at where we can cut. When you talk about expensive projects, those are capital projects. They come out of depreciation funds or the underground fund. So those don't impact what we're talking about here today. And all the expenses that we're talking about are in line, you know, other than the power supply piece with this increase. So we've done our due diligence on this internally. And, you know, that's what I can say to that.
Wendy, can I ask one more question? It's just, so option 3 is the annualized, right? Option 3 is the annualized?
No, option 3 was, or sorry, it was option 2 that it had all burners going, okay? The rate refund, the rate increase, and the PCA, but the options didn't tell you how to collect the PCA. It just showed you a $1.4 million revenue source. And then
So-
you would have to decide how to collect that.
Okay, so the vote is on the, what I call the annualized or the peaked, right? Is that?
Well, it's
That-
both. It's on how much, which of those line items to collect.
Yeah.
Okay, forget the rate refund. Dave said that's already baked in. But the
Right.
rate increase and the PCA, you have to decide, is it going to be both of those, one or the other? And if it's the PCA, how would you administer it?
Okay, and if on the latter, if you administer it, the questions are annualized or at the time it is being used, as it were. So my question simply is, annualized, how long do we live with that result? It's just through what? The end of the fiscal year, December 31st?
Through December.
So it'd be a 12-month experience. It would be a bounded experience, right?
No, what we're saying is if you guys annualize it, it'll be voted on to go into effect for the year. However, if the winter costs aren't as high as is forecasted, you guys could vote to take that PCA off, say, you know, September, if the revenues are there. So it's not bounded for the whole year. The board can take that off whenever they feel it's necessary. So if we came to the board and said, we're looking pretty good for the rest of the year, we're, you know, revenue neutral now, you can leave it on or you can take it off, you guys could vote that.
That's very helpful. And the boundary then is the end of the year. That takes it to that concludes it. Is that right?
Well, what happens when there's another spike in natural gas costs for the next winter?
Well, then we revisit it. My point is simply that we're voting on 1 year.
That's the current proposal. I mean, there are two options of how we collect $1.4 million. One is to do it over the short period of time when the gas costs are so high, our supply costs are high, which is as much as a 14% increase on the bills. Or we say, okay, we're going to spread out that 14% across the year and still collect that same amount of money, but over a longer period of time, and include a concerted outreach and education campaigns to people so they understand that the decision we were making is we still need to collect that money, but we're doing it with, you know, your monthly bill in mind, and that we're offering an opportunity to pay it over a longer period of time.
Yeah,
It's the same amount of money.
Well, I get that.
Okay.
And that's very useful. That is that's a great summary of where I understand where I think we should go. I'm only asking the simple question, when does this end? It ends at the end of the fiscal year, right? It ends at, or December 31st. That decision needs revisitation at the end of that year. Is that right?
If that option is selected, right?
Okay, got it. That's
If
all,
it
that's
just
all I
were-
wanted,
yeah.
that's all I wanted to know.
It-
Okay.
It's not permanent until we make it so. So it's only a 1 year
That's,
annualizing the cost.
that was my narrow question, was just that. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, all good discussion. Are we done with discussion so we can move out of the rate hearing?
Gordon has a question and I have a question.
Okay. Gordon.
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick, but there's another dimension to this that was presented that we haven't discussed, and that is the rate of return. That's the right term. In other words, the amount that the enterprise returns to the town of Concord. I was not on the impression, I mean, as a board member, I support the town and the town finances, and it seems to me that if we did not return that capital to the town, there would be all kinds of repercussions downstream that I don't want to be responsible for. But so I'm assuming that we're all on board with trying to continue that policy. But I understand that DOER requirements actually limit our ability to deliver a return. If we're running a deficit, then we're not actually allowed to do that. Anyway, Dave, do you have any, can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly confused, Gordon, in that, you know, the light plant funds stay in the light plant funds. So there's a distinction between general fund and the enterprise. And so the board historically has said they wanted a return of 2 to 3%. And so that's what we're kind of showing. The part I think you're getting at is if we don't have a positive return, then by law, we cannot pay a pilot to the town, to the general fund.
Okay, that's what I meant.
Okay, perfect. So, so the idea for the 2 to 3% was voted on by the board members of past, and we've kind of sticked with that over the years. The philosophy is we don't want to take, we could go up to 8% by law. We don't feel it's necessary to collect that much revenue just to sit on it. So, you know, you guys, have, you know, talked about the fund balance policy, which we're going to discuss in December. But, you know, that's been a good guide for us. And I think looking at this, you know, sticking with something around 2 to 3% makes sense because, you know, Laura's done a good job identifying that these are forecasts. You know, we can't predict weather. We're going on what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what the industry's saying. So if you go with a 2 or 3% forecast, you might end up with 0.5%. You could end up with 4%, but you're not going to be. So I tend to agree with that principle of 2 to 3%, and it's been a good guide for us over the years.
Just as a reminder to this whole board, we agreed on that assumption as part of the cost of service study and the modeling. So that 4% bakes that in already, right? So we've reviewed and visited this, but I don't feel like we need to do this.
I agree with that. But we could be putting at risk, right, if we don't make the right decisions here. Right.
Well, but part of it is today's point, it's all a forecast, right? So the world could change and we have to, as a board, revisit and evaluate throughout the year as well. So agreed.
I have one final question about market exposure. So we've been signing power costs, power purchase agreements. We're buying, according to the website, 20% from the ISO grid, and then 40% is market as of 2021. We have, you know, Seabrook coming in to our portfolio, which would lower our exposure to these energy fluctuations. This PCA request of 1.44, that is driven by that exposure, that 60% exposure to natural gas production of electricity. Is that correct?
So in 2020, we were only about 15% open. In 2021, about 20. And in 2022, Brian, the forecast is that our portfolio would be subject to market price fluctuations for about 30% of the total. So all this PCA requirement that you're seeing is attributable to the 30%. If we were only 50% covered, it would be much higher. If we were 100% covered, it would be much lower. But again, there's a risk in being 100% covered as well. You miss lower price spot opportunities. So, our goal of about 20%, is still resulting in, because the market price fluctuation was so severe, even though it's only attributable to 20 to 30%, it's still giving us this much of a hit.
That's it. That shows that we've done some good work in lowering our exposure to this increase.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let me ask again, I would like to entertain a motion to close the rate hearing. And
Wendy,
that-
it's Carlin Reed. I have to interrupt. I'm sorry, but you
Wait,
have a
you can't
fatal
talk.
flaw. You have a fatal flaw in your process. This is supposed to be a public hearing, and you're not allowing members of the public to add their short comments. So before you mess this up, allow for the public comments to occur and then take your vote. It'll be short, I promise. Thank you. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. So at this point, Dave, is that officially what we need to do, is have public during the rate hearing and that, or after?
It is
Yeah,
a
you
hearing.
can, you can do it during the hearing, and then after is when the board would vote.
Right.
You could make additional comments then as well.
Okay. So I'm misinterpreting-
But if the board's done, then you can start taking public comments.
So that's what I'd like to do then. So Mark had his hand up the longest, so I will ask Mark to comment.
I appreciate Carlin's point. I think it would be a real mistake not to take comments on rates during a rate hearing. I really appreciate the presentation that Laura put together. I think it has surfaced some really important policy issues around rates. And what I wanted to point out is that at least in my mind, what she's presented in the options represent the extremes, sort of spread everything out over a full fiscal year or consolidate the shock at, within a short number of months. But actually, you have an infinite number of options in between those things. For example, you could create a PCA of about 10% for the winter months and then leave a small sort of trailing PCA for the remaining 12 months. The fact is that you're addressing an issue which is highly subject to weather, and we never know what the weather is until it's already happened to us. So something that was more modest than the 14%, 2.4%, 2.4 cent PCA for the winter might allow sort of an accelerated collection of revenue during the winter, accomplishing what I heard Brian advocating for, which I agree with, which is bring the costs more in line, bring the price to the ratepayer more in line with the costs and when it's occurred. And if it turns out to be a heavy winter, that might be enough. If it's a light winter, it won't be enough. Then revisit it again and see whether that smaller amount for the remainder of the year is effective at collecting everything. So I would argue for take a middle road and do a little bit of both, introduce the seasonality in the PCA, and then see what you know once most of the winter is behind us. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Carlin?
Wendy, can we have a response to that? That's an option that wasn't on the table.
We can do that now or after. Laura, do you want to comment on that? Or Dave?
Well, Mark's right. Of course, there are an infinite number of possibilities. And what we tried to show you were some bookends. You unfortunately cannot just take a straight line average and move the money around to create the options on the fly for you to consider right here, because our sales are very lumpy. And so, for example, the biggest months, typically are Jan, Feb, and sometimes March. And then we don't have as many sales in the shoulder months. Sometimes we have one or two good summer months. So if we go with something like Mark's talking about maybe 2 cents, PCA for the winter, or a penny and a half or something like that, and wait and see how much that collects. A lot of the opportunity to collect will have passed us because many of those kilowatt hours of sales will be flowed under the bridge already, gone, right? You're not going to be able to collect those again. And then you're trying to collect more on fewer kilowatt hours in April, May, and June. So it's just difficult, like for you to try to, in this meeting, say, oh, okay, let's convert the 2.4 into 1.5 or 1.7. Somebody's got to do all the arithmetic out. Okay, and take the actual projected sales. And Mark's right. That's projected sales. If they end up being different, we either over collect or under collect. So we didn't want to inundate you or flood you with 1,000 different options. But certainly what he's talking about, which is doing something in between 2.5 and 0.9, maybe we do a penny and a half or 2. And if that's not enough, we end up keeping the penny and a half for the rest of the year, instead of going down to 0.9 or something like that. I don't know, but I mean, certainly his point could be taken under consideration.
Carlin?
Thank you. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. It looks like electric bills will have to go up as a necessary result of to cover the shortage in the light plant's revenues. But I would encourage the light plant to also consider 2 consequences that I've noted. One is an incentive for homeowners to look to generate solar power so that they don't have to bear as much of a burden of this rate increase. And the second consequence that I'm pretty sure will occur is the light plant's bad debt balance will increase for people who are like last year, were not able to pay for the bill. So just be prepared for that and make that in your calculations, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Get the agenda, we might get an update on that, but so I think I saw someone else's hand raised.
David Allen's hand was raised. I don't know why.
Yeah. But it's not now. David, do you still have a question? Yeah.
Don't know how that hand got taken down. I didn't do it, though you're entirely welcome to take it down now.
It was probably me.
I'm glad somebody's managing. Reaching back to actually Federal Reserve data, almost shockingly, it shows that very close to a third of the town, certainly 30% of the town, housing costs exceed their ability to pay those housing costs. We're a rich little town, except we're really 2 little towns. One of them, folks for whom their light bill is rounding error and only their accountant ever sees it, and other folks for whom it can be catastrophically increased. And it's not a handful of people that we see in the fund that we have that people can apply to. No, it's about a third of the town. And it's a mistake to think otherwise. And of course, I bring this up because it's context for this question in the air right now, which is associating pricing with cost causation. And why do you want to associate a price with cost causation instead of hiding where the costs are? So people can make decisions about consumption, of course. Well, that third of the town, and of course not all of them are in this category, but a very substantial portion of the town that we don't ordinarily think of, will find themselves troubled. They're troubled by the increases in taxes, of course, and some of them are run off from town because they can't pay those taxes, but they'll also be hit hard by the increase in their electric bill in contrast to the rest of the town. Probably most of us on this call that really can tolerate it and won't be happy with it, but it won't impact us. But those large number of folks in town will be seriously concerned. Of course, what that means is they're price inelastic. They can't change their consumption. They're just going to have to pay the damn bill, and it's going to go up. And let's put another context here. The world's expecting that energy costs are going to rise. A lot of hullabaloo right now about the increase of gas prices, but there's been a lot of talk about how your energy and therefore your heating this winter is going to rise. Everybody knows that's going to happen. Most anybody paying attention to the news anyway. For me, this suggests that you want to reduce the impact on that more or less a third of the town who are going to have trouble with it anyway. Yes, they'll have to pay more the rest of the year as well, but at least it won't be as large a number. Put it another way, let's use the logic about associating price with causation, cost causation in a rational fashion. If consumption is price inelastic, it doesn't get you anywhere. Finally, let me speak to the question of, from the point of view of at least one member of the rate-paying public out here, this business of the services that the light plant provides, and whether, for instance, we might want to cut back on those cut some place or the other. I look only to the tale Dave told at the beginning here about what happened when the Northeaster blew through. Our light plant comes close to being world-class quality. Yes, our power got cut off over here too, but guess what? It only went for up to midday or some damn thing like that. We've been someplace else with frankly, a crummier light plant. We've been here for several days without power. You're hearing from one member of that rate-paying public that, my God, let's praise and support and appreciate the work that's gone into setting rates so we can continue to have this world-class quality of service. Enough from me. Thank you very much. Too much from me. Wendy, you're muted.
No, I just realized that. So just recognize, thank you, David, for your comments. Appreciate that. Always finding the right balance in everything we're doing. So thank you. With that, I am not seeing any more hands raised. Just checking that. And so I would now like to entertain an opportunity to vote to go out of the rate hearing at this time. Can I entertain a motion for that?
I move we leave the rate hearing.
I second.
Pam? Okay, so I'll do a roll call. Gordon?
Yes.
Pam?
Who
Yes.
seconded?
Pam did. Pam, Alice? Yeah, she did. Okay, and I agree. And then I think
Yes.
Brian as well. Thank you. Appreciate it, Brian.
Aye.
So thank you all for that discussion. So now let me ask the group. I know some of us made reference to our preferences in terms of this vote that we're being asked to make. Are there additional comments that the board wants to make in terms of the options? Do you understand the options that we've reviewed? And Dave, the other question I have in terms of the vote that we're making, are we looking first to support the PCA in general? Is that the first vote to make? And then there's a sort of a secondary question about how we might want to implement that.
I think I would break it out into two pieces. I would think the board would want to vote on the cost of service study increase that was done by Baker Tilly. That one piece, and then the PCA and the philosophy on how you want to approach it. So I think there's two pieces that you should look at.
But there would be two parts to the second piece, right?
It could be, yeah.
I mean, there would be, right? I mean, how do you implement PCA? You either annualize or you don't, isn't that?
Yeah, you're right, Pam. So the first question is, Rate increase, thumbs up, thumbs down. Second question is PCA, do you want to have one or not have one? And then if you want to have one on the PCA, how do you want to collect it?
Exactly. That's very helpful. Exactly.
So with that in mind, and the rate increase that was recommended is that's consistent with the cost of service study. So can I ask the board, are there additional feedback, comments on that topic as it relates to a vote? This was the 4% overall increase that we reviewed. It was consistent with our Baker Tilly discussions and adoption of cost of service study. So, Gordon?
I'm not opposed to implementing the cost of service study, but I just can't say, oh yeah, approve. I want to know, I really want it. Yeah, someone said, maybe Laura said earlier that rate sheets are not available or not needed because we have the study. I don't operate. Last year, we got very specific. We could look at each one, and there were some questions about specific ones. We still have time. We don't have to get this done until January, right? So let's lay it out, and let's be very specific and very granular across the whole set of rates to know exactly what it is that we're approving. I just don't feel I don't feel ready to just say, oh yeah, right, yeah, whatever, everything above or all above or what she said or anything like that. I just really want to know exactly what is getting approved and also what's potentially getting changed. I want to see the specifics.
So basically, with the rate increase, all the rate sheets are going to stay the same. They're just going to increase the percentage that was presented. And, you know, in terms of having a lot of time, we don't really have a lot of time, Gordon, when you think about what the staff has to do and the filing that we have to do with the state to have it implemented by January 1. So if we push it out, and you guys could certainly vote to push it out to December, the rates wouldn't be implemented until February 1st, opposed to January 1st. So just so everyone knows, that's really what the case would be.
So is Gordon abstaining?
There's nothing proposed for a vote yet, so I don't.
Okay. That was a comment. Okay.
And you know, even having one rate sheet and show me what you're talking about would have been helpful. I mean, throwing a 191 page report at me and saying, oh yeah, I just, you know, look, I'm not telling you I don't support whatever it is the study said, but I don't know, it just feels like hand waving to me.
Dave, do you want me to bring up the comparison table? Would that be
Sure.
helpful or not?
Yeah, if that's, yeah, because this is in order, right? This is what we're deliberating right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
This was distributed to the board in the last
Yep.
week. So you do have that. And so Laura, if it would be helpful, if you could bring that up, I think it'd be helpful.
Okay. Can everyone see this Excel spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So right here, it says January 1st, 2021. This is the residential service R1 rate. The current meter charge is $16. The energy charge is 7.3 cents. Distribution is 4.8. The capacity are these levels for these different tiers of volumetric usage. And so the total volumetric rate for the first 657 is 15.9. The next 178 is 17, and everything over 835 kilowatt hours per month is 19.1. What's in italic here is what was proposed in the Baker Tilly report for 2022 for Res R1A. The meter charge would go up to 16.8 cents, which would be a 5% increase over 2021. The energy would go up 8 to 8.2 cents, an 11% increase. Distribution would go up to 5.2 cents, a 6% increase. The capacity cost would actually decrease in line with market prices to the tune of about 10%. But if you add all these components up for a total volumetric cost, this doesn't include the meter charge, incidentally, these numbers down here, but it includes the other three elements. It's The first tranche would now be 16.6. The second one would be 17.6, and the third one would be 19.5. And this is the overall increase for those different volumetric tranches. This is the same study, but for the time of use rate. This is not the time of use rate that we proposed last year that you guys turned down. This is the existing time of use rate that is filed with CMLP's tariffs. And so you can see the increases and decreases and the overall increase. This is ETS and its increase. This is net metering with banking. These are the monthly demand charges based on the size of the array. Currently, small arrays pay $3.60. The proposed 2022 rate would be $3.80. And for all size arrays, it would be between a 5% and a 6% increase. Small general service of 4%, medium of 4%, and large general service of 6%. So this is just that summary. Instead of you having to go through either the study, Gordon, or lots of rate sheets, this is sort of a summary of it, but we can provide the rate sheets, and I actually think that's a good idea. It's just that we would like to get going on doing all the preparatory work that we need to do internally in terms of reprogramming the billing system and filing the tariffs with the DPU so that we could actually start billing new rates effective with the January bills. That would be good. I prefer to make rate changes as of the first of the year if possible. It makes life easier afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for just jumping in here. Thank you, Laura. This is excellent. This is exactly what I was hoping for. That you're a lifesaver here. And just backing up to a comment that David said, we've had all year to do this. All right, so waiting until November 18th and saying there's no time to deliberate isn't really fair to this board. And the board has taken on. We paid a lot more attention to broadband recently, so that's taken up a lot of meetings. And maybe we just need to meet more often a month. Okay, so thank you for this, Laura. I guess two things jump out at me at that chart. One is that in the tier, in the residential tier, the smallest producers have a bigger increase than the smaller users have a larger increase than the largest users. I think I recall that the largest users have a 2% increase and the smallest users might have a 6%. Could you put that back up again, if you don't mind? And then that I guess we're probably stuck with, but it just jumps out at me. I'm directing my attention to E16. And then over on the right-hand side of that spreadsheet, if you could bring it back again, if you don't mind. I'm interested in the fact that the largest commercial consumer users are paying a 6% increase, which is higher than. Could you bring could you share your screen again?
I'm unable to share for some reason. It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
You're talking about the large group?
Yeah, that one was the 6%.
You should be all set. You should be all set, Laura.
Okay, let me try it again. Okay, can you see this?
Yeah, so there are two things that jump out. The 5% that the smaller in column E at row 16, that's 5% versus 2%. That may be okay, I guess, because after all, that may be okay, but it's not perfect. And then the other thing is at column Y, row 18, that 6%. This is one of our concerns with some of the measures. That if we drive up our rates too high, we could lose some key customers. So those are the two things that jump out at me.
Yeah, let me just comment on that, if I may, Gordon. So one of the reasons for that is because when you increase something in terms of cents per kilowatt hour, which is cost-based, like something's costing us on a cents per kilowatt hour basis, it's going to be a larger percentage for something that costs less than it is for something that costs more.
Okay.
So it's basically a fixed cost increase, but as you reflect it over a smaller rate, it seems like a bigger increase. And that's happening over here too, because the G3 rate is actually smaller than the G2 rate.
Oh, so those aren't the largest customers?
These are the largest customers right here
Okay.
that currently pay just under 13 cents, and they would pay 13.7. And so that's, a 6% increase over the $12.99. But over here, G2 would pay 14.5 versus 13.9, which is a 4%. And actually, if we were to do this out a little bit more, right, that would be a little bit closer. And these, no, those look about the same, actually.
Okay, I'm okay with the residential, and as long as we just note this and I want to keep an eye on the commercial, and I don't want that commercial to get too big. Just, this is a rate philosophy thing. It's like we want to be cognizant of our biggest customers. So
differential in the small general service market this year in the cost of service to make sure that we didn't hinder any growth for our smaller employers in town as well. Remember that? So,
yeah, you may recall you did a very significant rate decrease for this class to try to get more competitive with other surrounding municipals. So this rate is these people were paying over 18 cents in 2020.
All right, that's great. We can include that in whatever messaging, and even just having it in our head is helpful should we be challenged on that. So this is good. I'm glad that we took a look at this, and I'm okay with proceeding.
I just make a comment quickly. I'm really interested in the 5% and the 2%. I was not involved in this because I wasn't on the board, but I respect that. I just want to make a note that I'm personally very interested in knowing more about that in the future. Why the 5% to 2%? I understand the ostensible reason which Laura provided, which makes sense on the surface, but just for future reference, I would love to know more about that.
And it's basically it's because we're raising the meter charge.
I don't care. I don't feel like I've got that completely. I'm want to know more. I'll talk to Laura or something, but it doesn't, on its face, it doesn't look comfortable to me.
it's inherent in all the assumptions we made in the cost of service study. So we can, if you get, we can probably re-review those same materials and those assumptions are there.
Yep.
So
great, thanks.
And so just a comment, I actually can't see anyone again, and that might be something.
I have a quick question, Wendy.
So yeah, I know Brian wants to speak and I see Dave Allen. I just want to acknowledge to the board that we have also had some preferences over time to revisit the ETS rate and the net metering rate. And this proposal right now is not taking that on at this time. So I just want to acknowledge that. I know the board wants to do that. And I think in the interest of what we're trying to do with rates, that we wouldn't be doing it this time, but acknowledge that I know that many members of the board want to do that. So with that comment, Brian, do you want to add your 2 cents? I know that's probably where you're going.
I got a full dollar's worth. So the biggest concern I have is actually these rates are not following our philosophy of increasing the meter charge and putting more of that distribution collection into the variable rate. We as a board said that we wanted to see the meter charge be more fixed collection for distribution expenses. And here we're doing an 80-cent increase on the $16 instead of an $18 or $20 increase. And more importantly, we're increasing the per kilowatt distribution collection instead of which is against our previous philosophy. The ETS rate, thank you for bringing that up, because we're reducing the distribution collection there by 77%. They're very small numbers, but again, we're going from 8 cents to 8.3. whereas distribution and energy together is over 12 cents. So other ratepayers are subsidizing ETS still to this day. Solar, we're increasing the fixed charge for the first time since we established them.
Second.
Did we increase the?
It used to be $6, now it's $6.60. Now it's going to $7. So there was an increase in there.
All right. It's not following, it is the Baker-Tilly report, but it isn't following the practices that we've been trying to accomplish. We don't have time to go into all of the balancing, but there's a lot of work to be done. We're not talking about rates on this board for the last 2 years. We need to have a discussion about how we approach the full rate structure.
I agree.
Dave Allen, I see your hand raised.
Thanks. Since the board's single formal responsibility or power, to put it the other way, is setting rates, the single power, it is clear just how important it is for the board to be fully informed about rate, about certainly changes in rates. You have to start off from that point. It's also true that the rates fall out of the cost of study. That happened back there, and there was discussion back there. And only if this closing discussion, as it were, about rates is taken in the context of that cost of study do we really have sensible conclusions. It says that you have to pay attention to the cost of study. You have to have come to a consensus about what you're going to accept in it. You are stuck then once you've accepted that. Yeah, there will be movement across classes and so forth, but let's get useful with this observation. It means the next cost of study, realize that what you're doing is actually starting the process of setting rates, which is your single authority. And let me come back to what's already been raised here, and you've heard it from me over the going on 20 years that I've been at these board meetings. The meter charge is a stand-in for the fixed component of the rate. It needs to be about $70, and everybody understands that. And if you look across the country at heads up, progressive, thoughtful utilities, they're moving there instead of in tiny little increments. Just remembering that it doesn't raise rates overall, because that means that the variable portion goes down. We need to get there. And hopefully you and whoever is on the board when we get to a next cost of study will see that we get there. Thanks.
David, and I'll just remind people that part of the cost of service study did make a deliberate 5% annual increase in that rate at this time, because no one was really ready to do that $70. So, and I think we need to keep evaluating that as part of our cost of service. So to that point, that was what's behind the meter charge increase that we reviewed. So
I don't think that there's a consensus on $70.
no, I don't think so either. I'm just commenting. That was the comment from the board, that we didn't have consensus on that. But what we did have consensus on was an agreement of a slow, regular increase in the meter charge going forward. And that was the 5% that was in the cost of service study recommendations.
If I could, Wendy.
Briefly, because we're almost.
Yes, obviously, very briefly. There's no reason to be incremental in increasing the fixed component, because the variable collection goes down. In other words, it doesn't.
Not for everybody.
increase.
Not for everybody.
No, and that's been discussed. And once again, we need to look forward to the next cost of study and have a thorough discussion then. Don't need to say any more on it at this point.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just acknowledging we are way over on our agenda. I know the rate study is, the rate approval is really quite critical for our agenda. So I'm acknowledging we're likely not to get through the rest of the agenda, but I'm asking the board if they are willing and able to spend a few more minutes. I do want to keep this conversation going to see if we can vote on the rates and then also the PCA. Do board members have some time to stay on? Should we, I don't want to make it extensive, but does anybody have to stop at 9:30 directly?
I have until 9:45.
I'm
Okay,
good until 10.
okay,
I'm good until 10.
okay. I'd like to shoot for 9:45. I know I'm over. Pam, you're all set.
I need to get off as soon as possible.
So I'm actually,
9:45 is my end date.
Right. So let me go back. So we have sort of a couple of decisions and votes to make. We've had some detailed conversation around the rates that are included in the recommendation. So could I entertain a motion to move forward with the rate recommendations of 4% overall that are encompassed in the detailed spreadsheet that you all received?
So this vote is to, we're going to have a vote on the actual rates in December. Is that correct? I mean, we're going to see rate schedules based on our recommendations.
So I think the ask was to see if we're comfortable to vote on the rates that would be in the rate sheets, but that are represented in the Excel spreadsheets instead of voting separately in December on individual rate sheets.
The rate increase that we'd be voting on is to make sure that we cover our revenue expenses, things that we need that are outside the cost of power. So this is the rate increase that is recommended, and I believe the number was 1.3 million that we need to raise. So I would feel comfortable making a motion that I move that we address our rate increase and increase to cover the $1.3 million needed for the overall operating budget for the light plant.
I second it.
I think just to be clear, it might be helpful, Wendy, if you included in the motion that you move to approve the rate increase that was outlined in the Baker Tilly cost of service study. If that's what you want to agree to, just because so it would be very clear without going through each rate sheet exactly what numbers we're talking about.
Be one step clearer that the rates that were in the Baker Tilly are those that were reviewed during the meeting in the Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
Just, we're all clear. So with that amendment, Alice, do you want to restate your motion?
I move that we approve a rate increase consistent with the most recent cost of service study for $1.3 million to cover the operating revenues of the revenue requirement for the light plant.
I second it.
Can I just say, and as reviewed during the meeting?
That's the part that I'm going to have a problem with is the Baker Tilly methodology. I agree we need to increase rates, but I don't want to do a 5% across the board. I want to continue our philosophy of increasing the meter charge. So I would vote no on just following the spreadsheet.
I'm just trying to get the vote clear. So are we clear on what the motion is first?
Sure.
Okay, well, Pam seconded it. Okay, so are we ready to take a vote on that? I'd like to take a vote and then we'll get your comments. Okay, so Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Gordon.
Yes.
Okay, Wendy's going to vote yes, and then Brian, I'm going to let you comment your vote.
Yeah, I'm going to vote no for we need the increase. And so we got to do something, but this doesn't follow where we should be doing the collection.
And I would just say that I kind of agree. I mean, I think that I probably wouldn't align perfectly with Brian, but I just feel like I haven't been given enough opportunity in my role as rate setter to actually set any rates. It's like getting a spreadsheet and saying, okay, or getting a cost study and saying, okay, go with it, is not deliberative.
Can I just want to add to that, based on my brief experience on the board, I do agree with Gordon. I don't, if we have an important function jurisdictionally to set rates, I think we have been rushing a bit. I am deferring in my vote to a certain extent to discussions I believe have taken place prior to me, but I will generally observe that I think we're moving fast on some important stuff. And it leaves me a little uncomfortable, and I wish we could correct that going forward.
So
I mean, if
I
you looked
wanna
at, if you
offer
looked
that-
at one, if you
Go
looked
ahead.
at one of the minutes from, like, I think it was July, you know, we were told that nothing's going to change. It's like, you know, that was probably just an offhand comment, but it wasn't on the committee, on the board's radar to get ready for this. It's a really important function. And, you know, here we are at 10:30 or something, at 9:30, and we're really rushing to get this done. And it's like, I feel like as if I'm not doing as good a job, and I'm not representing the rate payers to the extent of my ability.
And this happens every November.
So I just want to suggest that we have spent a good part of 9 months discussing the cost of service study. Maybe some of the current board members weren't members of the board at that time. The cost of service study was quite detailed. We harangued, we argued, we debated line by line, the 170 or whatever page report to figure out what was right for Concord. And so I'm feeling that we are back to square one, where we are revisiting our discussions when we approved the cost of service study. And I don't know how to reconcile that at this point, when we know that we have a revenue shortfall. We need to meet our revenue requirement. This is the amount that we need to raise to do it. I understand philosophically, Brian is, you know, strongly positioned in a certain way to raise those costs. But in the essence of how we ever come to consensus to be able to move forward, I'm saying we discuss this at length, and we should be able to make this decision.
Can I
But
just?
we need to cover our revenue costs.
I want to make sure, just because this is a sort of impressionistic kind of moment for me, I do respect and defer to the prior decisions that were made and the extensive discussion. So my comment was much more modest about deliberation than perhaps might have been perceived. I'm not suggesting, and I agree with what Alice said, that there has been significant conversation. I was making a modest statement about just on these major rate decisions going forward. We just make sure we have time, but I'm comfortable with what has transpired, and I'm comfortable deferring to others in the sense that I was not present for some of those prior discussions. I don't want to suggest that I'm troubled by the data we have right now or what we're doing presently.
Thank you, Pam. So I just want to recast. I heard a vote for in favor, and then Brian actually had declined the vote, the recommendation and motion that Alice made. So I believe that is a final vote at this time. I respect that people had comments, and I respect that we want to go back and look at the rate philosophy as well, and we still can do that. But at this time, I want to move forward knowing that we have officially voted in support of the recommendations with Baker Tilly for the rate increase overall. So what I'd like to do now is to move on to the discussion around the PCA and entertain any additional discussions on how to proceed with that PCA. Or actually, let me start with, are people comfortable in proceeding with a PCA adjustment? And then we'll secondarily sort of talk about how. Is it within a quarter or over the course of a year? So,
I'm comfortable.
okay.
I think it requires a vote, so maybe I'll make a motion. I
Okay.
move that we assess a power cost assessment to cover the cost of supply cost increases. I guess that's the first question. The first part of the motion is to support the application of a PCA in our rate charges.
And I second that.
Okay,
I'll take the roll call vote. Alice,
yes.
Pam,
Yes,
Gordon,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and Wendy's a yes. So we voted officially to proceed with the PCA. So now let's have a secondary conversation about the method through which we want to apply that PCA. And so we've had some discussions about, or two options proposed in terms of spreading it for just December, January through December bills versus, two methods. One is to take the full year, spread it over the course of a year, or the second to spread it through January through April bills, which is about a 14% increase. So do folks want to comment specifically on their preferences for one or the other? Or an option? I'll acknowledge that Mark had a question about another option, but feel free to comment on that as well.
I would just say that I favor option one. If you're trying to move it along, I think we've had a lot of discussion and I favor option one.
That's
Which
the
is-
longer period of
A
time.
longer period of time.
I favor a shorter period.
I favor a shorter period.
I favor longer.
And I favor longer as well. And that's really more in keeping with our philosophy. I recognize that it's different than mirroring the cost of service study, but I also think the PCA is a different type of rate that we're doing, and it's just different.
So let me just say this in support of the shorter period, and that is that I'm acknowledging Laura's comment that you're collecting the higher tariff during the time when you're actually selling a lot of power. So that's one advantage of it. You can turn it into the longer period if you need to. So we'll have another bite at this apple. We can choose another PCA in March if that's needed. So basically, I'm just being focused. But if it's too late and we've already decided as a group, then I guess there's no point in discussing it further.
We can. We have
We still have to have a vote.
motion.
Okay.
Brian, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just telling Gordon, we still have to have a vote. That wasn't actually a vote. It was like a straw poll.
Mhm.
I'd be willing to make a motion and see how it goes. I move that we apply a power cost adjustment to our rates and that will raise $1.4 million over the course of 1 year.
Second,
So I'll do a roll call vote. Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
yes,
Gordon,
No.
okay, Brian?
No.
I'm voting in favor of that. So we have 3 in favor and 2 have declined. But it is a majority vote. I'll just acknowledge in my vote that I do see that there's an opportunity to revisit what we've collected mid-year or in the April timeframe to see if there's an opportunity to adjust that, and expect that Dave and Laura would bring that to us if there's an opportunity to adjust that. So
that's an excellent observation that I'm sure will go in the minutes, should go in the minutes.
We're going to be monitoring each month, so we definitely can update it as we go.
okay, so Dave, I think that those are the votes that you were looking to have completed today, and you can proceed as such. I just apologize to the board because we were unable to get through the rest of the agenda items and assume that they will all, the remaining ones would be deferred to December. I don't want to entertain anything new at this time. And trust that that will just have to be okay. Although I do want to ask you, Dave, on the advanced metering infrastructure, I assume at this point we are proceeding and the RFP has been issued. Just a comment on.
Yeah, we're in the process for sure. What I'll do is we'll send out an update. I'll send out a memo to the board on that, just so you guys have an idea where we are, and then we can discuss it in the December meeting. But things are on track at this point.
Yeah, I just would mention the actual release date, Wendy, for the RFP is scheduled for November 29th. So it would be in between this board meeting and the next one.
So a memo would be good to the board. Give us an update.
Yep.
Thank you.
Take care of that.
All right, so that'll be the Monday after Thanksgiving. So if there's any additional feedback, that would be important for the board to provide. So, all right, so thank you all. This has been a lengthy, extensive discussion.
Sorry, Wendy, I have to ask one quick question. At a previous meeting, I was asked to participate in the AMI process, and I haven't done anything to that effect yet as a liaison.
Yeah, your role is part of the review of the RFPs when they come in.
When they come in, okay.
So we're clearly not there yet, but it's going to be a pretty decent lift, I think. So we'll see.
Okay.
So Brian, just for your personal scheduling management, we're currently anticipating the due date to be January 25th.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I know that we're over time. I don't like to offer comments from the audience, but I'm not seeing any hands raised. Might be a good thing. And then Gordon, we'll defer any additional updates on the broadband committee that you're on as well, since we're over time. Okay, but that will also be agenda for December. So thank you. And we'll also be looking at the minutes from October as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll see you again on December 8th.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah,
Seconded. Oh, I move that we adjourn.
Then I'll second.
all right. So roll call vote. Gordon,
Aye.
Pam,
Yes.
Alice.
Yes.
I say yes, and also Brian, who disappeared.
I think he's ready to adjourn.
Vote. So, all right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye.